Welcome back to Cycling Italy. So my goal is to cycle through all 20 regions. I've already covered the 10 most northern regions over 61 days in the last 3 parts of the series, and in this video today I'll be heading south down the east coast along the Adriatic Sea, across the heel and then to the tip of the boot to get the ferry to Sicily. You'll see for yourself how the country changes from north to south, passing many blue water beaches, coastal towns, many of which are sitting on cliff sides, and then also some amazing places tucked away inland. As well as eating regional foods, learning the language, and as always, keep an eye out for that spot to one day buy and renovate a cabin. So in the last part we finished at quite a cold time of the year, so hopefully setting off in March this time I'll have a shot at some warmer weather. So sit back and enjoy the ride through South Italy. So I've only done about 10 kilometers now and made a stop because it was raining a bit more than I'd like. You know, it's not a good day to set off, but it's raining every day this week, so I have to do it one of these days.
Scusami,
Oh no.
ma abbiamo la macchina nuova, tecnologia nuova.
Ah, sì?
Bisogna spegnerla e accendere. Mi sono dimenticata di accendere. Allora ho dovuto attendere quei 5 minuti, 6 minuti.
No problema.
A posto?
Grazie.
Prego. Ma è tutto elettronico. Ah.
Sempre. Let's pick this up down the road, I guess. So it was a bit of a wet start, but the sun managed to come out on day 2 as I continued south, and I was trying to stick to the coast as much as possible. It was still quite cold around the Veneto/Emilia-Romagna region, so I just wanted to press on, avoiding major cities and just trying to get to that warm weather down south. I was still passing the smaller ones, and I passed through a place called Adria, which they happened to have a festival on, and people were dressed in all types of costumes. And I mean all types, you know, this guy was dressed in like a predator costume and everything. I didn't quite catch what the reason for the festival was, so if anyone does know, please drop that down in the comments, but yeah, just continued on. I was still inland here because there weren't really any consistent coastal routes at this point yet, and as always, keeping an eye out for areas where I'd like to buy and renovate that cabin one day. I think it would be a great physical project and just something to keep me busy, but then also actually have a solid foundation of a place to stay. And currently I'm favouring North Italy just because it's closer to family and also the proximity to the rest of Europe. But we'll see how that changes moving south, just if anywhere piques my interest, because there are quite some unique buildings and types of cabins down south. So I was still having some very cold mornings, and I remember when I was by the sea just outside Ravenna in like an industrial port area, the wind was so strong and it was like the iciest chill ever. So I grabbed the coffee that morning and managed to make it into Ravenna, which is a very nice city in my opinion. You know, the sun came out as well, and I just made it to this square and stopped at a coffee shop, and I made a visit to Dante's grave, which is very nearby, and then I just explored the rest of the city by bike. As the sun started to dip, I started heading south out of Ravenna. I had booked a room in a coastal city called Cervia, so I just had to make it to there to finally get a restful sleep. So just left Ravenna. The Garmin wanted me to head out west, but instead I followed the phone and it brought me through this amazing forest. Great day today in Ravenna, very beautiful place. I do recommend going. So yeah, let's continue on. That next day I fueled up at the breakfast, and it was a very sunny day, which was absolutely lovely, and I was just working my way towards Rimini, which is a coastal city on the edge of the Emilia-Romagna region, and it was nearing the end of the day when I got there, so I just passed through the city, just kind of taking it slow as well. and I posted up on a hill just outside San Marino to visit that the next day. It was fairly easy to spot San Marino in the distance on the hill. So many lights compared to the surrounding areas, so it was pretty clear where I had to go. So the Republic of San Marino is a micro-country landlocked in Italy in the Emilia-Romagna region. It is very small. I believe it is the 5th smallest country in the world. The main attraction is the city of San Marino, which has 3 big towers and connecting walls. But as you can see, the hills were absolutely atrocious and the city was even on a higher kind of level. And my legs were starting to give me trouble at this point, so I took a look at that and appreciated it from there, and I doubled back to Rimini to head further south on the coast. This is a Durston X-Mid 1 solid tent. It's very good. It's a pole tent. Kind of has some negatives in terms of, you need to stake it out, like I'm doing now. You can't just kind of set it up freestanding and, set it up on some concrete if you find like an abandoned building or, under a shelter. But I just really like this tent. The design is very intuitive and just, it's very solid. It's very well built. The weather was still kind of sporadic at this point. Some mornings were very misty, but it was gradually clearing up, which was very nice to see. The sun coming out a bit stronger every day. So heading down the cities along the coast, there are quite a lot of cycle routes, but they are fairly inconsistent. Some of them are left to ruin, but for the most part, I saw a lot of development going on, a lot of construction works, putting these routes back together. So it seems that they're just getting better and better, and hopefully there'll be a very consistent cycle route down the East Coast at some point in the future. So I made it into the Marche region, which is the 11th one, and officially the start of heading south. And I passed through the biggest city on the coast in that region called Ancona. Very hilly again, but it was very beautiful passing the city on the coastal route. You just have all these buildings kind of overhanging, being washed by the sun. I won't lie though, it was very industrial leading into that point, coming from the north. But it was very charming heading southeast. It was the complete opposite. It was hills, green fields and trees and forests and things. And I was just in the mood to kind of stop and just relax a bit, have a beer and make friends with the local cat that was visiting to see if I had any food. So I made it to the coast and I entered a very lovely town called Cirolo, and it just has this excellent kind of viewing point that looks out over the hills, and the sea was very blue. There was a bit of a mist and it was quite scenic, but yeah, definitely a very quaint place. I had a coffee there. Definitely one I'd go back to on this coast. It was a slow morning and the sun was out again, and it was reaching a point where I thought it was probably warm enough to actually take a dip in the water. So I managed to find a nice quiet spot along the coast, and oh my gosh, that water was freezing. But I think it was good for some recovery for my legs. My knees were giving me trouble at this point as well. And luckily the sun was just warm enough at this point to actually heat me back up. So feeling quite refreshed, I pushed on south and I made it to a city called Ortona, a city that's kind of raised up on a cliff, around the waters. And I had some food there. I had a rotisserie chicken, which is quite nice. Get some protein into the body and repair the muscles. And after having a coffee, leaving Ortona, heading down to the coastal level, I came upon this green paved cycle path, which was the start of an excellent route along the coast. It was around, I think, 20-30 kilometers. There was professional cyclists on there, people on roller skates, people walking. There was enough space for everyone, and it was just such a great time, to be honest. I was taking photos every so often of these fishermen houses that you can see. Very cool, with these arms kind of splayed out with nets hanging into the sea. And yeah, it was just absolutely lovely coming down the cycle path. I passed through some nice towns as well, but since the sun was dipping, I wanted to just push through, so I didn't really stop at any of them. But for anyone who's a keen cyclist and wants a nice route on the south, this is definitely one I'd recommend. So the soup I'm gonna have is gonna be that carciofi artichoke. The last soup packet I have. I need to buy more actually. But yeah, I can't recommend that cycle path enough. The one just southeast of Ortona. So good, honestly. I'm gonna go for the full wrap. Oh, come on. My oranges. So the next day I made it to Termoli, which is a resort town on a coast in the Molise region. I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly. It quite uniquely encroaches into the sea on like this fortified plateau, and it had a nice high street which, you know, you could look all the way down from the top to the bottom to see the sea, and it was just kind of nicely lined with cafes and restaurants, so I had a nice little pit stop there. And then a short ride away I stopped in a small village called Campo Marino, which is just on a hill next to Termoli, and they had some great murals about, so I just spent a bit of time going around there taking photos of those. So in this point now, in terms of the geography of Italy, I was passing by the heel, so I was heading inland a bit. And this day, the clouds kind of lined the sky in the morning, and just as the hours went on, they were just getting darker and darker and darker. And unfortunately, my route was bringing me straight into them as well. Guys, we got a trip first. Camping under the bridge. So this is the first time on the trip that I've actually slept under a bridge. Yeah, it's typically a place I'd like to avoid, but last night it was around 6:30 and the sky was just full of the darkest rain clouds ever, and you know, rain just started pouring down, and I was literally just down the road that way, you know, where the bridge is coming from. And I was under a tree just eating a slice of pizza I bought. The cars just driving by, just seeing me, just being like, well, yeah, that guy's in the thick of it kind of thing. But yeah, the forecast was for rain this morning as well, but I can't see anything and it looks pretty decent out there right now. So I'm hopeful that we're not going to get any. So I might actually just cook some breakfast here because I don't think there's a cafe nearby. So I made it into Foggia around midday, which is a fairly large city in the Puglia region. It's not that well known in terms of like a touristic spot, and it is quite hectic when I rode the bike in, but there was still that great Italian architecture about, and there were some quiet spots, and I managed to find one to stop in a nice square for a coffee and just to recover from that last night. So I made it past the heel and I got to the coast again, and there was quite a few towns lining that east coast before getting to Bari. Two nice ones I liked was Giovinazzo, and then I went inland a bit and I made it to Bitonto, which had some cool historical structures there. And finally I made it into the city of Bari, which is the capital of the Puglia region, and I worked my way to the famous old town, which is where you'll find probably most tourists in this city. And there's a reason why. It's very charming, wandering down the tight cobbled streets and being among the historic buildings. I got a coffee, classic, and some orecchiette pasta, which means like little ears, and that got me ready to cycle on into the sunset to find a camp. So in the Puglia region, you'll find many kind of interesting huts, and the most famous being the Trulli, and we'll get onto that in a second. But there was this second type of hut that I found that was more of like a stone igloo, and it had a grass roof, often with a hole in the middle, probably, you know, for smoke to escape from a fire or something. And I asked some of the locals what these were called, but they weren't all sure, but some of them called them pagliai. So now onto the famous Trulli. These are these white-walled huts constructed with like conical roofs made from local limestone. They were generally for like temporary storage, you know, for farmers, agricultural things, and sometimes even dwellings, I think, for the laborers or like farmhands. But now if you want to see a town of these things, the iconic place is Albero Bello, which kind of translates to beautiful tree. Albero is tree, bello is beautiful. And these Trulli are just so densely packed in there, all shapes and sizes. The town itself is extremely hilly. There's like an upper portion, and then if you go down, there's a very wide and lovely high street where there's almost exclusively Trulli, kind of like around the area, filled with restaurants, bars, and, you know, tourist shops. It's a very popular destination in the region. I've heard a lot about it, and it does have a nice buzz there. The best time to view the huts is probably, like early in the morning or when the sun is setting, because when the sun hits that midday intensity, it just kind of whitewashes the entire place because it is that perfect kind of shade of white. But yeah, very beautiful place. So I left Alberobello heading northwest towards the next region and passed through the nearby town of Noci, which is also on a huge hill, and it's kind of like got this epicenter with very narrow streets and tall buildings. And I ran into a bit of trouble here, again with the rear derailleur, but this time it was the cable to change gears that snapped. So luckily there was one bike shop there that was open, and the very kind and capable owner, Lanfranco, came out from his lunch break and wheeled my bike in and just started getting to work on it. Un negozio nuovo?
Un anno. 1 year.
Oh wow. E prima cosa hai fatto?
Io?
Sì.
Avvocato.
Avvocato? Oh wow. Criminale or?
No, civile.
Civile. So Lanfranco was previously a lawyer, but he'd worked with bikes for a long time. He'd been riding them since he was a little kid, he said, and he just said he wasn't really getting on with the kind of lawyer profession in Italy itself, and just wanted to do something he had a bit more of a passion for. The last couple pitches I've had on this tent have just been dreadful, and it's still completely wet from yesterday. Oh yeah, that rock is right in the way. So the next day was an amazing ride through some very kind of simple green fields that just look like Windows wallpapers. And there was this one shot of this cabin just on this hill in the distance with like this kind of like neon green fields. It was just really cool. And I made it to Matera, struggling up the hill. Matera is on quite an interesting geological kind of formation of like the canyon of the riverbank. I think it's the Gravina River. And it's just kind of like integrated into the hills. That originally the city started from some kind of like cave explorations, and that is kind of a big attraction of it now. You can kind of go down below the street level and like view these caves. And it is a very interesting and just unique place, very special. I had a decent chunk of time there to explore, get some food, ice creams and coffees as well. It was a very cool place and I'd definitely come back here. So leaving Matera, heading out southwest now, I'm trying to make it to the tip of the boot to go to Sicily. And the fields, again, like entering, but even better this time, so green and just so vast. It was just such a nice descent, down the hills and just being able to see green on the horizon everywhere. It surprised me, to be honest. I thought South Italy was just going to be very scorched, since it's such hot weather. But it makes sense since it was kind of coming out of that spring. Stuff is a bit more green. Maybe in the summer it goes completely yellow, but, I was enjoying the green for now. So I made it down to the south coast, and this was a bit more of what I was expecting of South Italy. A bit more scorched and a bit more kind of like barren in a way. The town's definitely harder hit by the hot weather, and a lot of the wells were dried up, and there was a lot of sand everywhere, of course. Like the wind would just blow it all over the towns, and it would kind of fill some of the roads. Guys, I've just pulled up off the kind of like merge motorway into like a castle. Yeah, I did not expect to see this here. It is day 85 today, and it's Monday the 7th of, what month are we in? April. And I'm meeting my parents in 11 days in Sicily, so I have more than enough time. 11 days, and it's only like 300 kilometers to go. I was a bit worried that this side of the coastline would just be major roads, and it kind of has been, but then again it's been okay with things like this, which is nice. That wind is going crazy. And then also the construction works going up on the hill. And then the view down the middle is just very beautiful. It's too bad the sun is shading a lot of it, but it still looks amazing. And I continued on going west, and I was passing this lake, Lago Tarsia, I think it was called, and there was just this one osteria on the lake, and I went in there and there was just the guy and his mum that ran the place, and there was no menu. He just kind of brought me food out, and it was a very kind of like hearty Calabrian cuisine. He was just bringing me kind of like these meats. I think it was like lamb and this type of pasta. It's almost like eating green beans. I'm gonna have to look up what type of pasta this is, I can't quite remember.
Come va? Dove vai adesso con la bici?
Faccio il giro d'Italia tutti i giorni. Adesso vado a Villa San Giovanni. Prendere il traghetto a Messina, a Taormina.
Villa San Giovanni, Reggio Calabria.
Sì, sì.
Quando ci impieghi? Stasera, stanotte?
No, forse in 4 giorni, perché è
A
250 km.
4 giorni ci metti?
Sì. Oh, non ho prenotato il traghetto ancora, faccio quando sono più vicino. Come si dice questa pasta? Che tipo?
Maccarone.
Macaroon. His son came back from school on a bus, and I said goodbye to the whole family before setting off back on the road. Full stomach, so ready to blast through these mountains. Now, the map I'm using to show the route doesn't show the elevation or any of the mountains, and most people know the ones in the north, like the Alps and Dolomites, but these mountains continue down the center of Italy, forming the Apennines, and then it also comes to the tip of the boot. So coming down the east coast, I managed to avoid most of them, but now that I was coming to the end of the mainland, there were a lot of mountains to get over in Calabria. And I made it to a place called Pizzo, which is a lovely coastal town on the sea, and it is famous for its tartufo ice cream, which is like truffle ice cream. I didn't have that, unfortunately. I had like the regular pistachio and chocolate, but it was absolutely delicious, and it had a great viewing point looking out to the blue sea. It was very cool. And leaving Pizzo, heading west again along the coastline now, it wasn't a far cycle to get to probably one of my favorite coastal destinations that I've seen on this trip, and I'll definitely be coming back here, Tropea. It's a coastal city sat on a cliff edge, and it just looked absolutely amazing, just kind of, pronounced on that cliff edge, and then the blue waters. And I went to the historic center part, which is the most beautiful, of course, and it's just very nice to walk around these streets, amongst the restaurants and cafes and things. It was very cool. The next day I kind of just chilled out on the beach. It wasn't that warm, it was around like 18 degrees, so still getting some sun in. And the next day I head off west, continuing to get that ferry. So leaving Tropea and continuing west, there wasn't really a complete coastal route, so I had to go inland for some portions. And past a city called Parmi, and now getting closer to the tip of the boot, I arrived at a smaller coastal town called Scilla, which again, most of the town was elevated on the hills, but at the sea level there was a lovely cove of beach. where most of the cafes, restaurants and hotels were. And I managed to catch the evening sun on the town, and it just looked very beautiful. And it was in Schiller that I met Hartmut, a German bikepacker of 18 years who had been around the world and still spends the majority of each year on the bike. His setup was so unique, it virtually had anything you can think of in a survival setting. It had a hatchet on the frame, a fishing rod on the back, and everything he said included weighed around 70 to 80 kilograms, and looking at how the bike handled when he was moving it, I can definitely believe it. This journey for me was more about the country of Italy than the mode of transport. Bikepacking was a great way to get around, but by no means is it a lifestyle for me, and seeing Hartmut and his tank just to reinforce that, he's just made of tougher stuff obviously. And I caught a beautiful sunset over the sea and Sicily in the distance there, and then got some rest to make a break for the ferry tomorrow morning. Getting the ferry to Sicily was a nice milestone. I completed all but 2 of the regions on the mainland, and Sicily was a place I very much look forward to cycling around on this trip. So I landed in Messina and started making my way down the coast, already taken away by the beautiful landscape of the green mountains, as well as Etna just in the distance there. It wasn't a long ride to get to Taormina, so I was just taking it very slow, and I finished the day just outside the town on a hill where this man lived with his dog. The dog was called Benvenuto, which meant welcome, and the guy just let me camp behind his caravans before I headed into Taormina the next day. It's a very small, condensed, kind of polished, historic town. You know, it's very famous in Sicily, and I do recommend going. You know, it deserves the rep it has. But with that, you know, comes expensive prices. I think I paid the most for a cappuccino at, I think it was 6 or 8 euros to have it on the square that overlooked Etna. But it was just kind of nice to sit there. You're paying more for the seat as opposed to the cappuccino, but the cappuccino was good as well. The town itself is again raised quite high above sea level, but you can either get a bus or walk down to the coastline, where there isn't really much of a beach, but there's a pebble cove where you can walk through the water to a small island called Isola Bella, and there's a few cafes and restaurants down there, so if you do want to spend some time by the water, you know, that is the place to go, but it's not the best beach by any means. It was great to be able to see my parents for a few days and also to rest up to take on the final leg of the trip, where I'll be exploring the rest of Sicily before ferrying back to the mainland to explore Campania where Naples is and then Lazio where Rome is, before finally getting the ferry to Sardinia and completing the challenge. So I hope you enjoyed this part of the series and hope to see you in the next one, and I'll catch you later. Ciao!